book of pages, nameless, like and bound and spoiled and blameless. Ready for my thoughts and small cachet. All the horns and sound and music. Soon I have a song worth using. Every word till now has been in vain. Lock the doors and bolt the windows. Crack the knuckles, pop the elbows. Take away now. Come on and make my day now. Honestly, oh me, oh my, I feel my nerve growing high. I can't contain the words, I am on fire. Do not quench, do not stifle. Pull the trigger, shoot the rifle. Not afraid to bleed from what perspires. No second cup of tea until it's finished. 1, 2, 3, it will diminish. Do it now, we are in need. And all you know the reason why your nerve it keeps decreasing. Take away now, come on and make my day now. Take away now, come on and make my day now.
Which entrepreneur inspires you most?
Which entrepreneur? I mean, I know a lot of people like to talk about Steve Jobs or Elon Musk and stuff. I'm actually far more. I like entrepreneurs that are a little bit lesser known or that have more of an interesting story. One entrepreneur that I've gotten to know over the years who's become a really good friend of mine is a guy named Tim Ferriss. And Tim wrote the 4-Hour Work Week and the 4-Hour Body. But what Tim does in particular, and he's more of a media guy now, he has a great podcast, is that he finds problems where other people don't see them. And then when he finds a problem, he creates a solution that is so unique and so interesting. And so whether it's his books or his podcast or some of the products he's sold, I think Tim Ferriss, if you guys don't know him, check him out. He's an incredible entrepreneur.
Let's get into e-commerce. Back to that video. Love a lot of those products in there, the bike, the tattoo. Explain a bit about what Shopify does for the entrepreneurs behind those products.
Sure. So you saw a bunch of different products there. Pure Fix was the bicycle company. Herschel Backpacks was on there. Tattly was there as well. So let's just pick one of those at random. So Tina Eisenberg is a designer based in New York City. She's better known by her online name, which is Swiss Miss, at Swiss Miss. Her daughter was coming home from these kids' birthday parties with these temporary tattoos that kind of looked like crap. They didn't look good, they didn't fit well, they kind of disintegrated after a couple of hours. And Tina said, I bet there's a better way to create temporary tattoos. And so she went to her community, her friends, her peers of these world-class web designers and said, I'd like each of you to design a logo or something really neat that I can put onto a temporary tattoo. And then she scoured the tri-state area and found a manufacturer to create a higher-end temporary tattoo, and went to Shopify, set up Tattly.com, and within a couple of days, she became one of the most popular temporary tattoo operations and businesses on the planet. So that's a new business that came onto Shopify at the beginning. You look at another company like Herschel Backpacks, which is a great Canadian company run by two brothers in Vancouver, and for a long time they were selling Herschel online, but they were using a proprietary piece of software that they built themselves. And that necessitated them having 30 or 40 people in-house that can run those stores. Servers, when servers went down, they had to find new servers. When there was a new change to modern day shopping, they had to integrate it themselves. And they decided they just didn't want to be a technology company anymore. They want to create beautiful backpacks. And so Herschel came onto Shopify as well to sell their backpacks. And so I think the cool part about Shopify is whether you're a brand new entrepreneur or you're a company or a brand that's been running at scale for a long time, I think what we do is we bend the learning curve and make it really easy for people to sell products anywhere they want. And I think if you were to walk outside, outside this building in downtown Toronto, you were to say to most, or you'd ask a random person, what does Shopify do? I think most people would say that we enable people to sell products on the internet, online. And my hope and the hope of our business is that if you go outside in a couple of years from now and you were to ask someone at random, what does Shopify do? They'll tell you that Shopify enables people to sell anything, anywhere, whether that's online or offline, or it's on Instagram, or it's on social media platforms like a Facebook, or it's on Pinterest or Houzz. And really that's what we want to power. We want to power commerce all over the place. And I know we're going to get into where commerce is going, but that is really the backbone of our business, is to make commerce better for everybody.
Maybe you can give us a bit of background on Shopify. Let's start at the beginning. How did you and Toby meet? And What was the idea at the time?
Yeah, so as you said, I started my first business when I was 17. I grew up I was born in Montreal, but I grew up in South Florida and went to McGill when I was 17 to begin my undergrad degree. Within a couple of months of starting school, it was 2001, stock market collapsed, and my dad was in finance and could no longer support me, and so I had to support myself. And built this little t-shirt business and started making t-shirts for universities across Canada, those promotional products you get in that first day of school. And one of the things that was really helpful to me throughout undergrad was I developed a relationship with a bunch of really strong mentors, people that were really helpful to me. I don't mean mentors in terms of someone I would call once a year. I mean people who consistently met with me on an ongoing basis to help me become a better entrepreneur and, frankly, a better human being. And one of those mentors, some of you may know his name is Philip Reimer. He's senior partner at Denton's, which was then Fraser Milner Cascarrian. And by the end of undergrad, Phil basically convinced me that although this t-shirt business that I had was a neat business, it had no competitive advantage, it had no barrier to entry. Therefore, it wasn't a business that would be sustainable. And Phil convinced me that to go to law school. He thought that for me to become a better entrepreneur, I should consider doing a law degree. And he happened to be teaching law in 2005 at the University of Ottawa for a year as a part-time professor. And so without even thinking twice about it, I applied to the University of Ottawa and got in and moved to Ottawa in 2005 to begin my law degree. And when I got there, I had no friends, I had no family there. But because I'd moved around so much as a teenager and as a child, I had gotten used to making new friends fairly quickly. And one of my tricks to making new friends in new cities was that I would always look for the entrepreneurs. That's sort of my tribe. It's always been my tribe. So I started asking around, hey, where do the entrepreneurs hang out? And someone had mentioned to me that there's a group of entrepreneurs that hang out at a coffee shop in the Glebe, a bridgehead, every Friday evening. And without even thinking twice about it, I showed up one Friday evening at this bridgehead in the Glebe in Ottawa, and I met 4 or 5 entrepreneurs. One was Luc Levesque from TravelPod, who's now at Facebook. Another one was Sam Zaid, who's the founder of GetAround. Aidan Razahi, who created Fluid Survey, sold to SurveyMonkey. And the last one was Toby. And unlike the others, it was clear that Toby and I were not alike. We were really different. And he was cerebral. He was brilliant. He was very thoughtful. He didn't say very much, but when he did speak, you really want to listen. Whereas I talk way too much. And Toby and I really connected. And he was just transitioning away from selling snowboards online to selling the software that he had written to sell those snowboards. And I told them that my business that I built in undergrad was not going to do very well now that I'm in law school, simply because in law school they use the Socratic method where they just call it a name and you have to answer the question. If you don't, you can fail. And so I wasn't able to fly around to all these universities in law school like I was in undergrad. As such, I needed a business that would run concurrently while I was in class. And here he was building an e-commerce software company. And so I ended up becoming one of Shopify's first customers in 2006 and building a t-shirt company called Smoofer. It was an online t-shirt business, and we sold licensed t-shirts. And I really ran that t-shirt business all throughout my grad school life, both in law school and my MBA. And then I moved to Toronto, and I worked at a law firm. And that was horrible.
We know how that story ends.
Yeah, it didn't end well, and mostly because, it wasn't anything wrong with the law firm per se. It was just that entrepreneurship, to me at least, is the industry that is closest to a true meritocracy. Truly a meritocracy. It doesn't always happen. Some people have advantages. They have connections or money and stuff. But for the most part, entrepreneurship does really level the playing field. The legal profession, at least at the time, I suspect it might be similar to that. It was really a legacy sort of industry. It mattered, they would literally refer to me as the student, like go give the student the work that the student should be able to do. And it was the opposite of meritocracy. It mattered how long you've been there, what your last name was, what golf clubs your parents were members of, which was not the case for me at all. So I hated law. And so in 2009, I called Toby and I said, I'd like to come and help you build this company. At the time, it was really Toby, Daniel, and Cody, 3 brilliant engineers, brilliant minds, and I thought I can sort of be the fourth and really help them on the business side and commercialize this amazing product that they had built. And that was 8 years ago, and it's been an incredible ride.
So if we can fast forward 8 years, speaking of playing fields being leveled, what's going on in retail is it's dizzying. The amount of change we're seeing even just this year with a lot of legacy firms closing or really struggling. What's going on out there? How is retail changing?
Yeah. So 2 points I want to make. The first one is when I was 8 years old, every couple of months this new video game would come out. And my dad and I would line up on a Saturday morning at the local electronics shop. It was like Future Shop, something like that. And we'd line up at like 7 a.m., and then at 8 a.m. the doors would open, and every dad and their kid or whoever would rush into the store and try to grab those video games, because there weren't that many. There was a limited supply. And for the most part, that's kind of how retail has operated since retail started, since John Wanamaker created Wanamaker's department stores in 1876 in Philadelphia. That was the first department store that existed in North America. And what I mean by that is, for the most part, retail has always been about retailers dictating to the consumer how the purchase should be made. You want this video game? You have to do it this way. You want this t-shirt? You have to go to this particular store. We don't care if there's traffic. We don't care that we're closed on Sunday evenings. This is the way you have to buy. And if you don't want to buy it, too bad, so sad. The big shift I believe that's happening is that it is no longer about what the retailers want. I believe the future retail is entirely about consumer choice. The consumer is now dictating to the retailer how he or she wants to make the purchase. And if you're selling to my little sister, you better have an integration into Instagram or Facebook or Pinterest. And if you're selling to my wife, you better have an integration to Houzz. We're building a new house right now, and so she loves Houzz. And if you're selling to me, I want a great online experience. But my mom and dad, even though they like completing purchases on their iPad, they still like to go into a showroom and try on the jacket and have more of an in-person conversation. And I think there's some retailers do a really good job of that as well. But it doesn't really matter what these channels are. It matters what the consumer, the particular consumer that you are trying to sell to, what he or she cares about and what they value. So that's the first major shift that I see, which is this idea of consumer choice. The second piece is loosely described as this idea of disintermediation, that these brands, these makers, these producers are now skipping the intermediaries, the middlemen, and going direct to consumer. Now that is somewhat well understood, and you can read about that in any newspaper almost on a weekly basis. What I think gets lost there is why this is happening. So if you go back 10 years or so, and you were to walk into a Best Buy, any city in the world. I ride a skateboard most days, and so Best Buy used to sell this really cool motorized skateboard called a boosted board. And if I were to walk into a Best Buy, and I were to ask the salesperson there, tell me about the boosted board, there's a really good chance that person has no idea about this boosted board. They don't know the range, they don't know the capacity, they don't know the speed or the distance it can go. They're just kind of selling a bunch of different widgets there. But I, as a consumer, I was willing to go through that tough process and give a margin or give additional money to Best Buy on top of what the board would cost because they had distribution. And by having a store in Ottawa or in Montreal or in Toronto, I was willing to pay them an additional fee because they were giving me additional value, which is that they had a store located in my city. Well, the internet has now democratized distribution. Now, sitting in my office in Ottawa or my office in Toronto, I can go directly to boostedboard.com and I can buy the board directly from the maker. I can ask, there's a little chat box that pops up in the bottom right-hand corner. I can ask questions like, what is the range? I can ask questions like, when do I have to replace the tires? And I can get great information, great insight prior to making that purchase. And it's cheaper. Boosted board makes more money because they don't have to share margin. I, as a consumer, pay less money because I'm not paying Best Buy an additional margin. And third of all, the product buying experience is so much better. And so what I think a lot of the big retailers have missed is that when the internet democratized distribution and their value add needs to be more than just having a store in a particular city, I think they missed the boat on that. And I think what they could have done is they could have said, hey, come into our store because you can actually ride the boosted board, which is something you cannot do if you're buying it online. Or come into our store because we're doing a clinic on using a motorized skateboard. If they were to do that, if Best Buy were to do that, I would be willing as a consumer to pay them a margin because they would be creating additional value for me. But just having a store in a particular location is not enough to justify an additional margin. And so I think those two things are what I believe are two of the biggest shifts.
Was traditional retail dead?
No, I mean, so I wear black t-shirt, jeans, and laceless Chucks every single day. I buy my black t-shirts from Harry Rosen for the most part. I like walking into Harry Rosen. I walk in there.
What do you like about walking into a store?
So, show of hands here, men in the room. How many of you shop at Harry Rosen? Okay, So do you guys all have, your guy there? It's like, oh, like everyone has their guy at Harry Rosen, those that shop there. Like, so I have a guy there, his name is Indy, and he knows me. So I walk in there, I don't have to peruse the racks. I don't want to do that. I'm not that type of shopper. I come in, he's like, Harley, I've laid out 3 different black t-shirts for you. They're your size, they're gonna fit you properly. And by the way, they're like this new technology of cotton. That is an incredible experience. Now, I can also go and buy it online, but I actually get value from going to Harry Rosen because I can see new t-shirt technology, new t-shirt brands. Therefore, I'm willing to pay that additional margin, additional cost to Harry Rosen because they create new value for me. And I don't believe traditional retail is dead. What I am seeing now, though, that is a bit worrying is that these traditional retailers are now cargo culting the cool brands. It seems like every traditional retailer now has a DJ in their store. Why? Right? Like some stores should have a DJ, but not every store. There's no reason for them to have a DJ in it. I have a good friend named Ethan Song who runs a company called Frank and Oak. You may know Ethan. When you walk into a Frank and Oak, there is a DJ, there's a great coffee bar, you can actually get a hot shave, really great experience. That is reflective and that really makes sense for the Frank and Oak brand. When I walk into Toys R Us, I don't need a hot shave, right? It's kind of weird. So I think what I'm seeing is the traditional retailers, they got fat and lazy for a long time, and now for the most part, they're just cargo culting what some of the upstart brands are doing, like putting DJs in every store. But I absolutely do not believe that traditional retail is dead. I just think they got lazy and they got to innovate. And I still have a great experience walking into certain stores, walk into Pusateri's, for example, here in Toronto. It is a great experience. You want to ask a question about the burrata cheese, where it's based and how it's made, they're going to give you a great explanation. That is a great experience. But if you're just going to sell me the same cheese that I can buy online and have it shipped to me within 24 hours, that does not deserve an additional margin. You do not deserve to make more money off that.
So the retailers you've mentioned are high-end, and you're going to pay more for that great experience. At the lower end of retail, where there isn't that margin flexibility, they're running up against Amazon and others that just have a scale and a cost base that no individual retailer can compete with.
They have a scale actually that's never been seen in the history of the world. The economy of scale that a company like that is impossible to, it was impossible to create previously.
So what will that do to that end of the retail spectrum?
I think that if you are, so we have over 500,000 stores on Shopify. You saw a bunch of those products. Very few of those products I would consider to be commodities or utilities. They are cool products. They are really cool backpacks, really cool temporary tattoos, an amazing bicycle. That is a majority of the stores on Shopify. They're selling something very special that is not commoditized. But if you're going to open an online store to sell detergent or toothpaste or toilet paper, you're going to have a tough time competing against Amazon. And I think Amazon has a real place there. In fact, they're a partner, they're Shopify's partner in a bunch of different categories. I think they're a great place to buy toilet paper or paper towel. I mean, I talked about my 85-year-old grandmother. I mean, she used to go to Florida in the winter. She doesn't go there anymore because of her health. I have set her up with a subscription service where every single week she gets all of her detergent, soap, shampoo delivered to her house. I mean, that to her is like a flying car, right? That is amazing to her. Yeah. So there's a place for that. But I don't think anyone who's looking to buy a really cool pair of sneakers or a cool wallet or a great watch is going to go to an Amazon store for that. I think that if you want to buy a really cool watch, you're going to buy it from Movement, MVMT.com, which is this amazing watch company out of California. That is a unique experience, and that is something that I don't believe will ever be commoditized.
Is that how Shopify differentiates itself against the likes of Amazon or maybe Alibaba, that you're the place of cool brands?
Well, keep in mind, Shopify is a brand behind the brands. There's no Shopify marketplace, right? So what we do is we give the tools to small businesses and entrepreneurs, the same tools that traditionally only the biggest companies were able to afford. So for the most part, it's our merchants that have allowed us to be everywhere, and so many of you have purchased off a Shopify store in the last couple of days, potentially without even knowing it, which is really interesting. We're okay with playing that role there, but I think if you're gonna create a new retailer and you're gonna sell a commoditized product, you're gonna have a tough time competing, which is why I think you have to have a unique value proposition and sell something that people actually want, as opposed to something that they can get at 1,000 other places.
Well, how do you look at Amazon? Friend, enemy, something else?
Look, I think every technology company in the world needs to be a little bit skeptical of every other technology company, just because that's kind of the way things work here. And things are changing so rapidly. But Amazon has actually been a great partner for us. So if you're on Shopify, you're a merchant on our platform, you can use FBA, you can use Fulfillment by Amazon. Therefore, you as a small business, you can leverage Amazon's incredible fulfillment. That wasn't possible a couple years ago. I think that's a great feature that we enable our merchants to have. We also do things. We have an Amazon channel. So let's say you're a clothing company here in Toronto, and at the end of the season you have to clear out inventory. With a couple clicks of a button, you can activate the Amazon channel, and you can push products to the Amazon marketplace through Shopify, and you can clear out inventory. There are certain advantages of that, and so they've been a good partner of ours and continue to be.
Tell us a bit about what you're seeing in the Canadian market versus other countries. The data that we look at suggests Canadians continue to be slower to adopt e-commerce, both as consumers and retailers. Are we just a couple of years behind, say, the US, or is there something deeper going on here?
Yeah, that's one thing that I don't fully understand. Given the geographical landscape and how much land there is in Canada, we should be the biggest consumers of e-commerce. It makes no sense that we're not. I think the problem is when you contrast that with our risk aversion as a culture, what you end up with is people not necessarily buying as much. But what happens is once you have your first taste of e-commerce, experience, you tend to really like it. I don't just mean for people that wear t-shirts and sneakers. I mean for my grandmother. I mean, she now realizes that it's more effective for her to stay at home and use her iPad to purchase something than to go out in the middle of the wintertime in February in Montreal and buy something in the store, which is not safe for her, and there's a whole bunch of other issues as well. So, look, we talk a lot about e-commerce and future retail, and it's very trendy to talk about these things. Let's just remember a couple things. If you look at total retail sales in the US, something like 15%, or I think just under 15% of total retail sales are done online. It's a tiny fraction still. If you look at Canada, it's less than 10%. So even though a lot is happening in retail with e-commerce and digital commerce and future retail, we're still in very much the early days of things, which is one of the reasons that I'm so excited about what we're doing for Shopify. But I think as Canadians, the ones that I see doing really well, I see a merchant from Knixwear sitting in the second row, an amazing company, Toronto-based. I mean, they're completely disrupting lingerie, and they want to go head-to-head against Victoria's Secret. By the way, they're not trying to build the best lingerie company in in Toronto or Ontario or Canada. These guys want to build the best lingerie company on the freaking planet, and they just happen to be doing it from Canada. And I'm seeing a lot more of those stories happen in Canada right now, more than I ever have. I'm seeing stores, we have a sort of version of Pusatari's in Ottawa called La Bottega. It's a 50-year-old little Italian grocery store. Beautiful little store, has amazing products. But what happens is every Canada Day, Ottawa gets all these people to come and visit us, and they walk into La Bottega and they buy the tastiest balsamic vinegar they've ever had. And the problem is they couldn't purchase it when they go back to PEI or Vancouver when they go home the next day. And the founder, Rocco Sr., who's in his 60s or 70s, he didn't really want to touch e-commerce because he wanted to have the personal connection. Well, he's now retiring, and his son, Rocco Jr., is now taking over. And the first thing he did when he took over was he set up labottega.ca. And now all of a sudden, their entire business model has changed from having a total addressable market, which is basically a core area of Ottawa, to being international. Overnight, they did that. I love hearing those stories. I love seeing more of that. But I think as a country, in general, not just in e-commerce or retail, Canada is becoming a lot more ambitious. And I think we Canadian entrepreneurs, we are fiercely Canadian, but we're becoming fiercely ambitious also in terms of what we want to do with our companies. And I think that's the most exciting thing I can see.
Do you think we as consumers are about to hit an inflection point in terms of shifting to e-commerce, or is that?
I do. I think we as Canadian consumers are sick of buying things out of the US and paying massive duties and waiting 4 weeks. Things are getting much better. I sit down with Deepak, CEO of Canada Post, fairly often to have these exact conversations. Why can't we actually have better, why can't we have all the selection we need here in Canada? Why do we have to buy from US companies? That's changing, and you'll see rapid change happen. That will be very much an exponential curve, meaning it'll go slow and then it'll speed up very, very quickly, and you'll see rapidly that innovation will happen, and we as Canadians will have a lot more selection, the things we've wanted to. I remember as a kid, my mom used to drive down from Montreal to like Burlington to buy like better cereals and better like yogurt and better stuff, like better cheeses and stuff. I think those days are going to be long gone in the future, and I think e-commerce will help with that.
When do you think we'll hit that inflection point? Is that this year, next, 5 years out?
I think it's going to be in the next year or two. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's an exponential growth curve. I think once we get on sort of the exponential side of that curve, that hockey stick, I think you'll see things happen rapidly. And I also think that, I mean, those of you that work at big companies, just go to your reception desk at like 11 a.m. on any given morning. You will see all these, I think you will see a lot of packages arriving. That just wasn't the case in the past. The fact that we're having packages all go to our office as opposed to our home is because we're ordering so much online. I think that'll continue to happen too. And unfortunately, the receptionists now have to be sort of mail sorters, which is a new phenomenon for them.
Let's talk about a few forces that are reshaping commerce and e-commerce. Start with mobile. There's a story, I don't know how apocryphal this is or not, where Toby in 2012 or 2014 left a voicemail for everyone in the company, essentially saying, stop what you're doing, everyone, we're pivoting to mobile. So you and he had a realization, obviously, that the smartphone was going to change everything. How has it changed e-commerce in the last 5 years since that pivot? And what would you anticipate in the next couple of years?
So a couple things on that. So I mentioned eBay earlier. So John Donahoe, who is traditionally the CEO of eBay, they call him Tall John, really amazing CEO for many, many years. I believe he came up with a term called snacking. Like as in snacking. And basically the term referred to us being in line or on the bus or waiting for an appointment to start, where we just have nothing to do. We kind of pull out our phone, we start dabbling on that. And that's what he referred to as snacking. And he actually determined that snacking would be one of the best ways for people to engage with commerce online. And that's around the time where eBay began to really shift things quite a bit and focus more on their mobile offering. For us, it was way more obvious than that. It wasn't any massive discovery. It just was obvious that over time, more and more traffic was happening, consumer traffic to our merchant stores were happening on a mobile device. Unfortunately, although the traffic was really high, the conversion rates were really low. So people were using their mobile phones and their smartphones to browse and look at products, but they were actually waiting until they returned home into their office to complete the purchase. And that was the gap between checkouts versus traffic was fairly large. It was a pretty large delta. And that's the time when we, as a company, decided we think mobile will play a huge role in the future of retail. Not because the phone looks cool, and not because it's innovative, but just because it's the thing that we all have in our pockets every single day. And we all have these supercomputers in our pockets now that are going to have all these amazing things. We didn't even know about ARKit back then, or some of the stuff that the new iPhone is doing, or the new Android devices are doing. But it just became obvious that this is where things are going, and it's happening very quickly. And so rather than in a linear fashion, slowly rolling out new mobile features, we needed the entire company to almost turn on a dime and say, look, we're not going to be a mobile-first company. We're going to be a company that just thinks about mobile as a primary way to engage. And today, mobile traffic and mobile checkouts have almost caught up with one another. And we have stores who exclusively sell their products on a mobile device entirely. That's how every consumer engages. And also from a merchant perspective, because we have hundreds of thousands of merchants, some of our merchants have full-time jobs at big companies, but on the side, they're doing the side hustle where they're running a little business. And frankly, for them, they're not only setting up their store on a mobile device, they're running their entire operation on their mobile phone. In some cases, in their car, in the lunchroom, hopefully not in the bathroom, but who knows, maybe that's happening too. But the idea is that it is the most convenient way to engage, both as a retailer and as a consumer. And so it's no longer this thing that, like, mobile first was a theme for a while. It's just, this is the way that most people engage with technology, and it's a big part of commerce.
You mentioned side hustles. Talk a bit more about that, if you will, because it's an interesting aspect or element of your strategy.
Yeah. The term side hustle is pretty popular right now, it seems, and I think for a couple reasons. I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I actually think that decades ago, people referred to side hustle potentially as their hobbies. They were these weekend warriors. Maybe someone made beautiful little children's toys in their workshop on nights and weekends, and then every now and then they go to a trade show and sell them, or maybe they sold them to their neighbors and stuff. I don't think those people called it a side hustle per se. They called it their hobby, and they were commercializing their hobby or having fun with their hobby. What I think is interesting is that because of companies like Shopify, the barrier to entry into entrepreneurship is as low as it's ever been. It's really, there's very little risk you need. If it doesn't work, you change your model. If it doesn't work, you pivot. You can try a bunch of different things. So because the barrier to entry to becoming an entrepreneur or a small business is so low, what's happening is you're seeing people that traditionally did not self-identify as an entrepreneur are now starting these side hustles, these side businesses. And in many cases, they're becoming multi-million-dollar businesses. We have a side hustle, we have tons of stories, but one of them in particular was a side hustle business that ended up being a $100 million a year business. And up until about the $20 million mark, the entrepreneur behind it, she continued to work at her big job at one of the large accounting firms, which is kind of crazy and interesting. But what's great about the side hustle thing is that it makes anyone who has an idea or has a passion, it allows them to actually do something with that. It allows them to commercialize their hobby, commercialize their passion. And I think what that leads to is you will see in the future more people will say, I'm actually doing my life's work right now, as opposed to I've worked for 40 years, I've now retired, and now I'm going to do my life's work sort of in my retirement. I think you'll see a lot more people finding their passions and hobbies to be quite lucrative early on, and then doing their life's work for the entirety of their lives, which I think is amazing. I think entrepreneurship is self-expression, so I'm really excited to see that.
Do you have any guess or estimate as to how many Canadians would be side hustling?
It's unfair. It's an unfair example, but so we encourage everyone that works at Shopify. We have about 3,000 staff on our team. We encourage everyone to have an online store on the side. Number one, we think it builds incredible empathy for what our merchants are going through, but more importantly, it actually keeps them current in some of the trends that are happening. And so I can tell you at Shopify, a meaningful percentage of our staff have side hustles, have stores on the side, and we think that's amazing. I'm randomly in a meeting with an investment banker on Wall Street, for example, who says, we have a lemon tree on our farm in California, and my wife and I are making marmalade or making jam with it. And this is, the person I'm talking about is a very senior member of one of the most prestigious investment banks on the planet. Certainly doesn't need the money, but him and his wife on weekends, they're running this business on Shopify on the side. That's awesome.
Great
it's pretty
story.
Cool.
So going back to mobile, one of the things mobile obviously has enabled is the social revolution. Can you talk a bit about what social is doing to retail and how retailers should be thinking about, you mentioned Instagram, for instance, how should they be utilizing channels?
What social has done, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, what social has done from a marketing perspective, I think, is even further level the playing field. It has turned, so I think that one of the main ingredients you needed to be successful as a retailer in years past was capital, resources. And I think one of the things that social media has done, which has been really exciting, is that now it's no longer about who has the most capital, it's actually now who has the most creativity. It's not about resources, it's about being more resourceful now. And that's what social media has done. So the example I'll give you is, when I was in law school, setting up Smoofer, the only way for me to get traffic to my online store was by buying AdWords. That was it. There wasn't Facebook ads then, there wasn't social media. I had to buy AdWords. And therefore, I was limited by my capital, the capital I had in the company. I was limited by my ability to borrow, and I was limited by my cash flow, because I was really financing operations based on past orders. So I was selling licensed t-shirts in a very small geography, but some of the licenses I was selling in limited geographies, they were also being sold on Walmart and Kmart and Sears, and I think even Canadian Tire. And so no matter what I did, if I was competing in a geography like Toronto, I would never win, because they had more money, and therefore they can afford to pay a bit higher for AdWords and for these ads. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up finding geographies where it didn't have shopping malls, but one of the brands I had was Spider-Man. So I found little towns where they had movie theaters but no shopping malls, and I would buy AdWords just for those towns, figuring that some kid would come back from the movie, Batman, and he'd say, "Mom, I want a Batman t-shirt." Mom would go on Google and type in Batman t-shirt, I would show up first. Now, it was only small towns, it was like Bécomo, Quebec, as opposed to Toronto or Ottawa, but in Bécomo, Quebec, I was big. And I think the difference now is if I was starting an online retailer of my own today, I wouldn't use Facebook ads. I would find people on Twitter that were talking about the Batman movie, and I would just try to engage with them and send them links. And I would go to Instagram and I would see who are people following that is saying something interesting about the new Batman movie. Maybe I would send free t-shirts out to people that I thought might wear them and might help promote for me, maybe some influencers. None of that costs any money. So I think what social media has done, and there's a lot of, I know there's a lot of baggage that comes along with social media that we as a society all agree to, but one of the things it has done, which has been incredibly productive and positive, is that now as a new business, I don't need to go raise $100,000. I don't have to mortgage my house. I can find a potential cohort of customers on Instagram or Twitter or Snapchat, and I can do that for free. I just have to put in a little bit of work, a little bit of effort. That I think is really interesting. And so in some ways, I think that what's happened is in the same way that companies like Shopify has democratized the technology side of retail, I think in terms of the audience and the attention side of retail, social media has also democratized that.
Got some great questions coming in from Facebook Live. One is about traditional retailers attempting to be marketplaces. How do you feel about that?
So meaning they don't sell their own products, they aggregate or they curate other products. I think if they do that, that's really cool, but they have to add value. The value that they add cannot be grabbing products from different places and putting it into one single screen. It's the same thing I mentioned about Best Buy, and I hope there's no Best Buy executives here because I've been tearing them up a little bit, but I think that if I were Best Buy, what I would do is I would shrink my stores down to as small as possible, almost like those like small Rogers stores that you see, very, very small, and I wouldn't actually sell anything. I would create these really cool demo stores where all my most popular products are on display and I can play with them. And there are people in those little stores that are incredibly knowledgeable about those products. They can tell me the weight of the camera and why this camera is better than that camera. That's what I would do. And if I did that and I added real value, then I believe I deserve to take a margin from aggregating a bunch of different products. If all I'm doing is grabbing products from different websites and putting it into one place, that means nothing to me. I just bought a new backpack. I'm going on a trip next week. I need a new backpack, and I went to this blog called Everyday Carry, and it just basically profiles people that have gone on these big trips using different backpacks. And the people that went on those trips, they do this amazing one-pager on what they love about the backpack, what they didn't love. I then bought a backpack on that particular site. Now, it wasn't their backpack. I think the backpack I ended up buying was a Patagonia backpack. But I was willing to give them an additional margin and buy it from them because they effectively had given me this whole new insight on which backpack to purchase. They added value to me. Therefore, they deserve to take a profit margin in that transaction. I think just aggregating by itself and not giving any additional value is lazy. And frankly, one of my stores are going to come disrupt you.
So another question from Facebook about your international operations. You're helping entrepreneurs all over the world now. What are you seeing in other countries that we might learn from? What's catching your eye?
So it's quite fascinating. So we have merchants in about 175 countries around the globe. And most of our merchants are in sort of the English-speaking world, but we have merchants all over the place. And one of the fascinating things about understanding and meeting a lot of these merchants is that each country and each region has these really interesting nuances. So for example, the idea of using a credit card to pay for a transaction online in India is unheard of. That is a country where trust is really important. And so in a place like India, if you want to sell something online, you have to use a cash on delivery type of model. Now, to use a cash on delivery type of model, someone has to physically go to their front door, knock on the door, give a package, and collect cash. That is a whole different model than what we're seeing. Think about chargebacks. Think about returns. I mean, so if you're going to be successful in a place like India, you can't just use the North American model and throw it down and hope for the best. You actually have to understand the cultural nuances of commerce in those countries. In other places, one of the things I was seeing, I think it was Indonesia, where what they were doing is they've been using Instagram to sell products for years, but they weren't actually using Instagram as a channel the way we are, where you can buy directly, you can swipe up and get right to a pre-populated cart, which is a great experience. If you haven't tried the Instagram channel for Shopify, you should check it out. It's phenomenal. But what they do is they put a picture of something with a price tag across the picture, and they say link in bio, and then you go to the bio, you click the link. And so they have found all these different hacks because frankly, in Indonesia, they simply did not want to go to a separate website. They actually they've adopted social media in a totally different way than we have in North America. So each of these countries is quite different. In the US, of course, right now, everybody is used to next day delivery. That is really great, but most countries don't expect that. In a place like Brazil, you just want to get your package. And you do, and that's getting better, but you just want to receive your package. Next day delivery is just completely unheard of. So I think that the international side is really interesting, and it's something we're spending a lot of time thinking about.
Another question from Facebook about Shopify Plus. What do you find it does best for large organizations or any any entrepreneur for that matter.
So the Plus story is really fascinating, and those of you that have read Christensen and Innovator's Dilemma will appreciate this, I think. But what really happened was we have always been the company that is focused on SMBs and entrepreneurs. And that's been our brand, that's what we talk about, that's what we care about, and it still is today. But something strange happened a couple of years ago. And what happened was some of these retailers that started on Shopify when they were very small ended up growing up really, really fast. They got really big, like hundreds of millions of dollars a year really big. And they didn't leave the platform. Now, if you contrast that to most software industries, you don't see that. So think about accounting. In the accounting industry, you may start with an Excel spreadsheet, and then you move to QuickBooks or Xero, and then you move to NetSuite, and then maybe eventually you get the Oracle Financial. There's this graduation as you grow. Email marketing, you may start with the BCC line, and then you move to MailChimp, and eventually you move to ExactTarget or something of that nature. That's typically how these sort of software industries operate. But that wasn't happening on Shopify. These people were staying on Shopify even when they grew really big. And so the idea was we created Shopify Plus in 2014 to help these merchants that graduated, that got really, really big on Shopify, to ensure that they had everything they need once they got much bigger. So for example, if you're a big merchant on Shopify, you probably need cross-border tax compliance. But if you're just starting out, you absolutely do not need that. That is completely useless. And so what we've done is we created a model which is we want to make the important things easy and then everything else possible. And we created Shopify Plus really to help these merchants that are getting big have a place to go to and have better, dedicated support. Perhaps they need, if they have massive flash sales, they can use that as well. Additional features and functionality that only larger, more complicated retailers require. Something happened around 2015 or so, around the time when we went public, which is that all of a sudden, all these really big brands that had their own e-commerce systems that were on these massive enterprise systems like IBM WebSphere or Demandware or Hybris, which is owned by, I think, Oracle or SAP, all these big enterprise e-commerce companies started coming to Shopify Plus. Now, it wasn't built for them, so we were interested, we were fascinated by why they were coming to us. And it turned out, what was happening was a lot of these big companies that had purchased these $5 or $10 million e-commerce installations and products, software packages for their companies, they wanted to be more nimble. They wanted to be more entrepreneurial. When they heard about Apple Pay being launched, they wanted to get Apple Pay the next day, which they can do on Shopify. They can't do if they run their own e-commerce system. Or they wanted to integrate into Instagram or Facebook. They couldn't do that in those systems. So now what we're seeing, and I mentioned this in our last quarterly call, most of the new merchants coming to Shopify Plus are not actually graduates. They're these large brands, the Procter & Gamble's of the world, the Unilevers of the world, that are actually coming to Shopify Plus because even though they're used to pay millions of dollars and having a whole 8-month RFP process, they actually want things fast, highly scalable, and really easy to customize, and we can do the Shopify Plus. And then we see all these big celebrities like Kanye West who built Yeezy on Shopify Plus, or Drake who built OVO, or Kylie Jenner who's created Kylie Cosmetics, which has done, I think she just came out with these numbers, so I can mention it now. She's done about $420 million of cosmetics in the last year or so. I mean, she is selling on a per minute basis more cosmetics than L'Oreal and MAC combined. I mean, that is disruptive, and they're all doing it on Shopify Plus, and they couldn't do it on those big enterprise systems. So Shopify Plus is a particular point of pride of mine, and in the same way that we think we've disrupted the e-commerce market for SMBs, I think we're doing some good stuff for more complicated, more larger businesses today.
So the Kylie Jenner story is amazing. What's the biggest insight you draw from, or we should take from that?
A couple things. When I was a kid, and I think when most of you were kids, at least as a young boy, I wanted to either be, an actor, or I wanted to be a professional athlete. That was kind of it. What's amazing is, or maybe a rapper or singer or something like that. What's amazing is rappers, professional athletes, they all want to be entrepreneurs today. So I have a friend, some of you may know, they call him Beast Mode, Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn is now playing for the Raiders. He was the Super Bowl MVP when he was playing for Seattle. I meet with Marshawn a couple times a year. When we meet, all we do is talk about the Shopify app. This guy has, I don't know, a 10 or 9-figure contract to play football in the NFL. We're talking about his $17 t-shirts coming in and how he can better optimize his online store. When we meet the guys from OVO, which is Drake's label, they want to talk about how they can better integrate into Instagram or into Facebook. So first and foremost, I think it's really cool that all these actors, sports figures, celebrities, they all want to be entrepreneurs. The second thing is, all of them have massive audiences. And previously, the way that they would monetize or get some value from the audiences would be to sell them concert tickets or sell tickets to a sporting event. And what they're finding is that if they were to do that, there'd be all these intermediaries involved, people that were taking a cut of all these different things. And so what does Drake do? Drake goes, gets a designer together, and they go and they create OVO, October's very own, a clothing brand. They open up a store on Shopify, and now he can convert all of his fans, his influence base, into people that are buying his products. And he is vertically integrated. He owns the full stack. He manufactures the stuff and he sells it. That is incredibly different and disruptive. That's the second piece. The third piece I would say is that, contrary to what I think most people think, these celebrities, they really, really give a shit about what they're selling. Sorry, I shouldn't say that at an RBC conference. They really, really care about what they're selling. We have visited Kylie a number of times in Calabasas and in California. And not only does she know everything about her product line, she is the one doing the research on new technologies in makeup. She is picking the colors. She is deciding what's going to come out for Halloween. She is so involved. I mean, I get text messages from Kris Jenner, her mom, showing me screenshots of their Shopify app as sales are rolling in during a flash sale. It is pretty amazing to watch this, and that is a completely new category of commerce that simply wasn't available, and I think it's super cool.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Another good Facebook question about intangibles. Can you share some insights of Shopify stores that are selling intangibles, experiences, or services?
Yeah. So a couple things on that. The product was really built to sell physical products. One of the things we noticed, so maybe a little bit of background on this. So Shopify's core offering does what most people need most of the time. That's it. Now that definition is dynamic. It changes as time goes on and things evolve. But the idea is it shouldn't be bulky software. It should do exactly what most people need most of the time. And then for everything that goes beyond that, that's particular to any merchant's requirements, we create APIs and apps and an ecosystem of people that can build on top of Shopify. So years ago, we had an app in our app store that did digital downloads. And over time, we started realizing that a lot of people were using this app, and digital downloads, like selling an ebook, was becoming more popular. And then Seth Godin called and said, I really want to sell my new book on Shopify. I need to have something that's a little bit robust. And we ended up building digital download technology in our core. That tends to happen. We're seeing more of that now, where people are using Shopify for purposes that were not necessarily as intuitive to us as they would have been. So someone that sells yoga mats now opens up a yoga studio. Now she also wants to sell yoga classes. Or a plumber who traditionally was doing invoicing and faxing contracts and now wants to be able to sell units of time. So I wouldn't say that's a large majority of Shopify, but one of the cool parts of watching 500,000 stores operate, that critical mass of merchants, is that we see people doing some crazy stuff on the platform. And what's great is they're able to bend Shopify to make it work for them in a way that is really easy and frankly, pretty inexpensive.
So you talked about payment tools and payment platforms. We've got a question here about cryptocurrency.
What's the question?
Is cryptocurrency going to be active or actively used in e-commerce anytime soon?
Yeah, so I won't get into whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of those things. What I would say, though, first of all, we've integrated into Bitcoin. I think we were the first platform on the planet to integrate Bitcoin. And actually, the first store that activated that was 50 Cent's headphone store, SMS by 50. 50 Cent was the first person to accept Bitcoin on Shopify, which is some cool Shopify trivia. And so I don't think Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is really what we should talk about. What we should talk about is alternative payment methods. I think in the same way that I said that the future of retail is all about consumer choice, consumers want to buy how they want, when they want, what they want. They also want to pay with what they want. So for example, if you are selling a product that appeals to people that are between the ages of 13 and 17, they probably don't have a credit card. Maybe they use their parents' credit card, but I'm not sure all parents want to give their 17-year-old kids credit cards. There are better ways to accept money that's safer, that's more productive, that's more effective than credit cards. And so when you use Shopify, if you're a merchant, you can accept Bitcoin, you can use credit cards, you can accept Shopify Pay, Apple Pay, PayPal. We believe that the future of payments is somewhat agnostic, and it's going to be really about how the consumer wants to pay. So if you're a retailer today, and I walk into a physical retailer and I walk into your store, I often don't carry my wallet with me because I have Apple Pay on my iPhone. So I may be buying a really expensive bottle of wine at the LCBO, and I go to the cash and I try to use it, and for some reason it doesn't work off of the LCBO. I wish it does. If you're from the LCBO, we should talk about that. But you should accept the payment that is preferred by the people you are selling to, full stop. There's no reason to. So I think cryptocurrency will have a place as more and more, I think now people look at it more as an investment vehicle than a transactional vehicle. I think that will change. But I think, some people still want to pay in cash. I think we as a retail industry should be agnostic to how people pay. Let's just worry about getting people in the store and getting them to complete purchases.
You've had tremendous success at Shopify, as you've talked about through this conversation, but we haven't touched on what a great place to work that you've built. Shopify has been voted the #1 place to work in Canada.
Number 3 in North America.
That's fantastic. What have you learned that you can share with us? No, that's worth applause. That's. I suspect all your other successes are rooted in the culture you and Toby have built. But just quickly, what have you learned that you might be able to share with us on building that sort of culture?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think people confuse culture. I think people assume that culture is putting a sign up on the wall of an eagle that says leadership underneath. That is not culture, and you should not put up those signs. It's ridiculous to do that. Culture, I believe, is what people do when nobody's watching. So what is your team, what is your staff doing when no one is there? Are they making good decisions without being told to make good decisions? People also confuse culture with perks. We at Shopify, we have some pretty cool stuff. We have full-time chefs in every office. Every employee at Shopify gets maid service to their home to clean up their house twice a month. We have some pretty neat stuff, gym memberships and all that great stuff. That is not a reason why anyone should come to work at Shopify. Those things are just small things that make our staff's lives a little bit better. I think that's important. The second thing is, I think that people talk about transparency in companies as being an important centerpiece of culture. But I see most companies talk about it, but they don't actually do anything about it. So once a week at Shopify, we have an AMA, an Ask Me Anything, where the entire company can ask the executive team questions anonymously, or they can put their name on it. And the rest of the company can upvote and downvote those questions, and we take the top 10 or 12 questions, and we answer it candidly and transparently. Every quarter we have a board meeting. The exec team writes a letter to the board. We don't do PowerPoint decks, we write a letter to the board. We share that letter verbatim with the entire company because we want them to know exactly what we're talking to the board about and what's relevant to those conversations. So all these things on their own are not enough, I think, to have a great culture. But in aggregate, it means you start treating your staff like adults. It means that people come and they act like they're owners. Even if they just joined Shopify last week, they kind of feel like Shopify is their own baby. They feel like Shopify is their company. And I think having a group of people who really do act like owners has made us a great place to work. Now, one of the challenges with being a company based up here in Canada, we do have one office in the States, but 5 out of the 6 offices are Canadian offices. We did have trouble convincing Americans to move up, particularly very experienced people. And luckily, that has all changed. We're now able to recruit the best people from, David Lenny came to us from Netflix, and JML was CTO of Atlassian. He's now running technology for us. Aaron Brown just came over from Amazon in Seattle, moved to Soundmated to Waterloo. We can now recruit the best people on the planet to come work at Shopify, and that is absolutely amazing. And so for those of you in the crowd, and I know some of you that are running companies, and some of you, we've had this conversation, you're like, I really want to hire this person, but they work at Facebook in Palo Alto or in California, and I can't get them up here. I don't believe that anymore. I was wrong about that. I wish I would have known that earlier on. We can recruit as Canadian companies from anywhere we want. The difference is you have to find the trigger, right? It probably won't be comp. It's certainly not going to be weather if you're competing with California. But for example, if you work at Google, and I have a lot of friends at Google, and it's a great company, but at Google at this point with 60,000 employees, if you go to work at Google, you are going to be part of a great company. If you come to work at Shopify today, even with 3,000 people, you are going to come to help us build a great company. Shopify is not fully formed yet. The concrete is still somewhat wet, and so you can help shape it, which you won't get at a company like Google at this point, or Apple at this point. And so figuring out those trigger points and figure out what does this person, this candidate really want, because if you're going to compete with weather, you're going to compete with stuff of that nature, or the brand. I mean, Facebook and Google, these are really big brands. It won't be fair, but if you can find something that's different, you bring someone who lives in Silicon Valley shopping for a house in Ottawa in the summertime, I mean, what they can have, the lifestyle they can have in Ottawa or Waterloo, or Montreal, or Toronto, relative to what they can have in New York or San Francisco, it's killer. And what's great is then they become massive proponents of living in Canada. They invite their friends up and say, it's not so bad here. And all of a sudden you get this reputation for people really want to move up here. It's the reason why I joined the board of C100 was to encourage the top 500 Canadians living in Silicon Valley to move back here. And I've been working hard at that, and I've brought quite a few of them back so far.
That's a great note to end on, that we can compete with anyone in the world. We've got a lot going for us in Canada. You are the standard bearer of that, as is Shopify. Before we thank Harley, I want to thank everyone here and watching on Facebook and WebEx for joining this conversation. Please mark your calendars. December 13th is our next Disruptors. Stay tuned for some more details, and be sure to register for our mailing list. Harley, as many in the audience know, we make a charitable contribution on behalf of our guests, and Harley has selected Salus Ottawa, which is a rehabilitation and supportive housing service for adults in the Ottawa area with severe mental illness. I wonder if you can just say a few words about why you've picked that cause.
Yeah, so it's a bit different here in Toronto because you guys have scale and a lot more people we have in Ottawa, but there's actually about a 5 to 10 year waiting list right now in Ottawa for people with severe mental health to find them housing and support. 1 year is not great. 5 or 10 years is completely unacceptable, and so it's a cause that my wife and I are trying to work hard on and fixing. So,
great. Well, wonderful. What a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. And
thank you to you. I mean, that's awesome. Thanks, guys.
Well, keep going.
Yeah. I was going to say how great you are. So.
All right. Thank you, Harley.